There are moments when you see your entire life, your devotion, and your sacrifice distilled into a single brutal number. I am Hannah Cole. For 3 years, I quietly paid their debts and denied myself a future, all to protect the illusion of the good American family and their lakeside legacy. But watching my brother scream with joy over a new car, bought with my money, while they handed me a pair of socks with a $2 clearance sticker, the obligation ended. They thought they had humiliated me. They didn't know I had just started counting. Here is the story of how I finally stopped saving them and started saving myself. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. The air in the driveway was biting enough to freeze the breath in my lungs, but I didn't feel the cold. I only felt the heat of the humiliation burning up my neck. It was Christmas morning, the kind of crisp, picture-perfect holiday my mother lived to curate for social media, and I was standing 10 feet away from my younger brother Tyler. He was screaming a high-pitched sound of pure, unadulterated joy that echoed off the frozen lake behind our house. He was peeling a massive, shimmering red bow off the hood of a brand-new sports car. It was sleek, black, and aggressive, a machine built for speed and status. My parents, Linda and Robert, stood on either side of him, their phones raised, capturing every angle of his ecstasy, their faces glowing with a pride they rarely showed unless a camera was recording. I looked down at my own hands. I was holding a tiny, badly wrapped box that felt light enough to be empty. The paper was loose at the corners, as if it had been taped together as an afterthought while walking out the door. I squeezed it, feeling the cardboard buckle. This was the moment the illusion finally shattered. This was the morning I realized that family was just a word they used to keep me in line. Standing there watching Tyler rev the engine while my parents clapped, I knew two things with absolute certainty: they had ambushed me for the last time. And by the time the sun went down, I was going to erase them from my life. To understand why I stood there in silence instead of screaming, you have to understand who I was before that morning. I was Hannah Cole, the responsible one. At 29, I was a senior financial analyst at a firm just outside Nashville. My life was a series of spreadsheets, risk assessments, and 70-hour work weeks. I believed in the simple, brutal arithmetic of the American dream. You work hard, you sacrifice, you build security, and you do right by your people. I didn't take shortcuts. My parents, however, built their entire existence on the appearance of success without the grit to sustain it. They owned Cole's Landing, a lakeside event venue that had been the crown jewel of our tight-knit conservative town for decades. To the church, the neighbors, and the town council, Linda and Robert Cole were pillars of the community, good, hard-working, God-fearing folks who hosted the best weddings and the most charitable galas. They sold a fantasy of rustic elegance, and they were their own best customers. Then there was Tyler. At 24, my brother was still finding himself. He was the golden child, the creative soul, who drifted between hobbies like a tourist. One month he was a vlogger, the next a DJ, then a sneaker reseller. He never held a real job, never paid a bill, and never faced a consequence. My parents called him entrepreneurial and special. They called me steady. Growing up, the dynamic was reinforced at every dinner table conversation. Hannah handles the problems. Tyler chases the dreams. I was the safety net. He was the trapeze artist. I accepted this role because I thought it was noble. I thought being the rock of the family meant something. I didn't realize that rocks are just things people walk on to keep their shoes clean. The trap had been set 3 years earlier. It started with a frantic phone call on a Tuesday night. I could hear my mother weeping before she even spoke a word. The pandemic had throttled the event industry, and bookings at Cole's Landing had flatlined. My father got on the line, his voice shaking with a vulnerability I had never heard before. They told me the loans were piling up, the bank was calling, and they were months away from foreclosure. They weren't just going to lose the business, they were going to lose the family home, the lakefront property that held every Christmas memory, every birthday party, every shred of their identity. "We can't tell anyone, Hannah," my mother had sobbed. "We're too embarrassed." If the church finds out, if the neighbors know we're failing, we can't survive the shame. They framed it as a temporary crisis, a small stumble in a long legacy. They turned to me not for emotional support, but for a bailout. "You're so good with numbers, Hannah," my dad had said. "You know how to fix this. We just need help for a little while, just until we get back on our feet." I didn't hesitate. I didn't ask to see the books or demand a repayment schedule. I felt a surge of protective loyalty. This is what you do for family, you step up. I told myself I was saving their dignity. I told myself I was being the good daughter. I agreed to cover the mortgage and the primary business loan for a few months. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the glow of my laptop illuminating my face as I logged into my bank account. I keyed in the routing numbers and the account details. As I clicked confirm on that first transfer sending thousands of dollars into their account, I felt a heavy, somber pride. I had no idea I had just sacrificed 3 years of my life for people who would later pretend I didn't exist. 3 years later, back in that freezing driveway, the cycle was closing. Tyler was about to drive off in a car worth more than my annual rent, and I was about to open a gift worth exactly $2, and along with it, I was going to unwrap the ugly, undeniable truth. The first month I covered their bills, the gratitude was overwhelming. It was a production of tears and embraces that felt almost cinematic. My mother held my face in her hands, her eyes wet, whispering that I had saved their lives, that I was the answer to their prayers. My father shook my hand with a firm, trembling grip, promising they would pay me back every cent plus interest the moment the venue bookings picked up. I felt indispensable. I felt loved. But gratitude, I learned quickly, has a very short shelf life. By the third month, the tears had dried up, replaced by a casual expectation. The panic was gone, and in its place was a routine. When I called to confirm the transfer, there was no thank you. There was just a distracted, "Okay, honey, did you make sure to tag it for the principal balance?" The transfers ceased to be a favor. They became just what we did as a family. To make it easier, or perhaps to stop the monthly conversation that made my stomach churn, I set up automatic transfers, one for my parents' home mortgage, one for the massive commercial loan on the venue. The numbers were cold, precise, and unforgiving, leaving my account on the first of every month like clockwork. As their financial bleeding stopped, my life began to shrink. I couldn't sustain a senior analyst lifestyle while bankrolling a failing event center and a 3-bedroom house I didn't live in. I gave up my bright, airy apartment downtown and moved into a drab complex near the highway, the kind with thin walls and fluorescent hallway lights. I started driving a 10-year-old sedan with a check engine light that I covered with a piece of electrical tape because I couldn't afford the diagnostic fee. When my coworkers planned a weekend trip to Napa or a happy hour at the new upscale bar, I became the queen of excuses. "I can't this time," I'd say, feigning a smile. "Family stuff. They really need me right now." I bought my clothes at thrift stores, carefully checking for stains while watching my bank account bleed out. I vividly remember sitting on my floor one Tuesday night eating instant ramen for the third time that week, my fingers numb from the drafty window doing the math on my phone. I wasn't living. I was merely functioning as an unpaid life support machine for 2 people who were sleeping soundly in a heated house. The cruelest part wasn't the deprivation, it was the contradiction. While I counted pennies for gas, Cole's Landing was getting a facelift. I would scroll through social media and see the updates. New commercial-grade string lights draped across the lawn. A fancy new wrought iron archway for ceremonies. Fresh paint in the banquet hall. Underneath photos of these upgrades, my mother would post captions like, "Blessed to be growing," and #small business proud. I saw my mother wearing a new gold necklace in a selfie. I saw my dad posing with a high-end fishing rod. I saw Tyler sporting limited edition sneakers that I knew cost more than my car payment. I tried to rationalize it. I told myself maybe they got the gear secondhand, maybe the renovations were done on credit, maybe I was just being bitter and overthinking it. But the knot in my gut grew tighter. The town, of course, ate it up. The Cole comeback story was the talk of the community. In the grocery store, neighbors would stop me and say how wonderful it was to see my parents doing so well, how they were true pillars of the community. The church newsletter thanked Linda and Robert for donating space for a charity gala, praising their generosity. I stood there in my second-hand coat, listening to people worship a facade that I was paying for. I felt my identity slowly being erased from the narrative. I was the engine under the hood essential for the car to move, but invisible to everyone admiring the paint job. The only person who seemed to notice the cracks was Noah Reed. Noah was a coworker at the firm, a guy with kind eyes and a sharp mind for data. He had started bringing me extra coffees in the morning and lingering by my desk. One night over takeout Thai food in the break room, while everyone else had gone home, he looked at me seriously. "Hannah," he asked quietly, "where is all your money going? You make a senior salary, but you look like you're carrying the weight of the world." I tried to dodge the question, mumbling about helping family through a rough patch. Noah didn't let it go. He leaned in, his voice gentle but firm. "It's noble to help," he said, "but if they aren't careful, they're going to ambush your future to save their present." His words rattled me, but not as much as what happened the following weekend. I had driven home to drop off some paperwork. As I walked through the back door, I heard my father on the phone in the kitchen. He didn't hear me come in. "Yeah, we'll take the premium package for the landscaping," he was saying, his voice booming with confidence. "Don't worry about the billing. We'll figure it out. Hannah always manages things." He said it with such casual entitlement, as if I were a utility he could turn on and off at will. It landed like a physical punch. They didn't see me as a daughter who was sacrificing for them. They saw me as a solution. They saw me as the fix. For the first time standing in that hallway with my keys digging into my palm, I wondered if my family would ever stop taking if I didn't find a way to make them. 3 years of financial hemorrhaging led to this moment. I drove home for Christmas with a trunk full of carefully wrapped presents and a heart full of fragile hope. I was exhausted, my eyes burning from staring at spreadsheets and my back aching from the cheap mattress in my apartment. But I told myself this year might be different. Maybe they would finally acknowledge the sacrifice. Maybe we could have an honest conversation. But as I turned onto the gravel driveway of the family estate, my hope evaporated, replaced by a cold, confusing dread. The house looked upgraded, not just maintained, but renovated. There was brand new vinyl siding and a chic slate gray fresh landscaping with winter-hardy shrubs that I knew cost a fortune and expensive wicker furniture arranged on the porch. This was not the home of people barely scraping by. This was a home straight out of a magazine. Inside, the disconnect only deepened. The living room was dominated by a 12-foot fir tree professionally decorated with coordinating silver and blue ornaments. The smell of catered food wafted from the kitchen trays of high-end hors d'oeuvres instead of Mom's usual homemade casserole. The whole place felt like a Pinterest photo shoot, curated and artificial. My mother Linda greeted me not with a hug, but with a critical once-over. "You look tired, honey," she said, smoothing her silk blouse. "You really should take better care of yourself. You look so washed out compared to the rest of us." Before I could respond, Tyler breezed in, phone in hand, filming a story for his 300 followers. He was bragging loudly about an upcoming, big content deal, a vague promise of fame he'd been making for 5 years without ever producing a single consistent project. My father Robert sat in his leather recliner, boasting to a visiting aunt about how we clawed our way back at the venue. He spoke of resilience and grit, carefully omitting the fact that it was my paycheck that had kept the lights on for 36 months. I sat in the corner, clutching my mug, feeling like a ghost at my own funeral. Throughout the evening, Tyler kept winking at our parents, hinting at a massive surprise coming in the morning. The air was thick with anticipation, but none of it was directed at me. When we exchanged gifts, I handed over thoughtful, modest presents: a framed photograph of the venue from its opening day for Dad, a handmade scrapbook of family recipes for Mom. They gave me polite, quick thank yous, barely glancing at the items before pushing them aside to make room for Tyler's haul. He tore into box after box, expensive noise-canceling headphones, designer sneakers, a professional camera gimbal. My parents clapped and cheered, filming his reactions for social media. Then came the ambush. Robert stood up, jingled a set of keys in his pocket, and grinned. "All right, Tyler," he announced, his voice booming with theatrical pride. "Let's see if Santa parked anything outside for our special boy." The entire family surged toward the front door. I followed, my stomach dropping. We spilled out onto the driveway, and there it was. A brand new sports car, a gleaming, aggressive Mustang in midnight blue, sat idling in the cold, a massive red bow strapped to the hood. Tyler screamed. He literally screamed, running toward the car, phone raised, yelling, "Let's go!" to his imaginary audience. Linda wiped happy tears from her eyes, and Robert clapped him on the back, shouting that it was a reward for all his potential. I stood frozen near the porch railing. My mind instinctively ran the numbers. That car was at least $50,000, maybe 60. I looked at the new siding on the house, the landscaping, the catering. I felt physically sick, as if I had been punched in the gut. I had been eating ramen and taping up my dashboard while they were buying sports cars. We went back inside the energy mannequin loud. "Oh, wait," my mom said, almost as an afterthought. "Hannah, we have something for you too." She pointed to a small, sad pile near the back of the tree. I walked over and sat down, my hands trembling. I opened the first box, a cheap generic scented candle with a clearance sticker that had been half peeled off, leaving a sticky residue. Next, a mug that read, "World's Okayest Daughter." Finally, a pair of thin, fuzzy socks. I turned them over and saw the bright orange tag, $200. I looked up, stunned. My mother smirked, a look of patronizing wisdom on her face. "You need to be humble, Hannah," she said sweetly. "Not everything in life is about money. Everyone gets what they deserve." My dad chuckled, nodding in agreement. Tyler, high on the adrenaline of his new car, laughed and added, "Hey, don't worry about it. You're the rich one. You don't need anything." That was the breaking point. In a single icy moment, the illusion dissolved. I realized they hadn't just forgotten me. They had used my income to protect their lifestyle and bankroll Tyler's fantasy career while treating me like a faceless wallet. They had drained me dry and then mocked me for being empty. The word hit me with the force of a revelation. They were trying to erase me. I smiled, a tight, polite expression that didn't reach my eyes. "This was eye-opening," I said quietly. I excused myself, claiming a headache. I walked up the stairs to my childhood bedroom, closed the door, and locked it. I sat on the bed and opened my laptop. "Okay," I whispered to the empty room. "Let's see exactly what I've paid for." The house was finally silent. The manic energy of the unwrapping frenzy had faded hours ago, replaced by the heavy, rhythmic breathing of three people sleeping soundly in a warm house. Outside, the programmed Christmas lights blinked in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Red-green darkness, red-green. I sat cross-legged on my childhood bed, the glow of my laptop screen the only light in the room. I wasn't crying. I was past tears. I was in a place much colder and much sharper. I was doing what I did best. I was analyzing the data. I pulled up my banking history going back exactly 36 months. I opened a fresh spreadsheet and began to type. I didn't group the expenses. I listed them line by line, date by date. January 3rd. Mom and dad mortgage, $2,400. January 15th. Venue loan interest, $1,800. February 1st. Emergency HVAC repair, $850. My fingers flew across the keyboard, the clicking sound loud in the stillness. I categorized every transfer, every loan that was never repaid, every time I covered a grocery run or a utility bill. I watched the sum formula in the bottom right corner climb. It hit $10,000 within the first few months. It crossed $25,000 by the end of the first year. By the time I reached the present day, adding the transfer I had made just last week to save Christmas, The number sat at a staggering $52,450. I stared at that number until the pixels blurred. A wave of nausea rolled over me, hot and sour. That wasn't just money. That was a down payment on a house of my own. That was my student loans paid off in full. That was a year of travel I had denied myself. That was my freedom siphoned off month by month to buy vinyl siding and a Mustang for a brother who had never worked a 40-hour week in his life. They had cannibalized my future to decorate their present. But the math was only the beginning. My mind drifted back to a frantic phone call 2 years ago. They had begged me to co-sign a refinance agreement to get a lower interest rate on the house. "It's just paperwork, Hannah," my dad had said. "It doesn't mean anything, it just helps the bank trust us." I dug through my digital archives, finding the folder labeled Scanned Docs. I opened the PDF of the refinance agreement and scrolled past the loan terms to the title section. My heart hammered against my ribs. I read the legal text 3 times to be sure. My name wasn't just on the loan, it was on the deed. I was listed as a joint tenant with rights of survivorship. I sat back, the realization washing over me like ice water. They never told me. In every conversation, they framed it as their house, their legacy, their sacrifice. They wanted my credit score and my signature, but they never wanted me to know I had actual power. They wanted to use me and then erase me legally and emotionally, keeping me as a silent partner who paid the bills but owned nothing. But they had slipped. They had underestimated me. I wasn't just a tenant or a daughter, I was a legal co-owner of the property they were so proud of. A cold calm settled over me. I didn't scream, I didn't go wake them up. Instead, I opened a new email draft. I typed the address of a real estate attorney I knew from my firm, a shark named George, who specialized in property disputes. I attached the deed and the loan documents. My message was brief. I am a co-owner of this property. I want to force a partition sale. What are my options to liquidate my share immediately? I hit send. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like I was holding the detonator. I wasn't done. I created a new folder on my desktop labeled Evidence. I took screenshots of the spreadsheet highlighting the grand total. I downloaded photos from my mother's Facebook page showing the lavish venue upgrades and the time-stamped photos of Tyler's new car. Then I drafted a social media post. I wasn't interested in drama. I was interested in the truth. I uploaded a photo of the $2 socks sitting on my bedspread. Next to it, I attached the screenshot of the $52,450 total. The caption was brutal in its simplicity. For 3 years, I supported my family so they wouldn't lose their home. Today, they bought my brother a sports car and told me to be humble with my $2 socks. I'm done paying for a lifestyle I'm not allowed to be part of. I knew what this would do. In a town like ours, reputation was currency. This post wouldn't just embarrass them. It would shatter the carefully curated story of the hard-working Cole family they had sold to the church, the neighbors, and their clients. I wasn't doing it to be petty. I was refusing to let them rewrite reality. I would not let them erase me. I packed my suitcase quietly, moving like a shadow in the room I had grown up in. I checked the time. It was almost 1:00 a.m. I scheduled the post to go live at 7:00 a.m., right when the town and my parents would be waking up. I took one last object from my bag, a plain white envelope. Inside was a printed note stating my intent to pursue a forced sale of the home if a repayment plan wasn't signed within 30 days. I walked downstairs, the floorboards creaking softly under my boots. I placed the envelope under the tree right on top of the empty spot where the car keys had been. I stepped out into the freezing night. The air was sharp and clean. I walked to my beat-up sedan, the one with the check engine light, and threw my bag in the passenger seat. As the clock on the dashboard hit 1:13 a.m., I closed the door and looked once more at the glowing house. It looked peaceful, deceitfully warm. "They threatened to lose everything without me," I whispered to the silence. "They're about to find out what life looks like when I stop saving them." I put the car in gear and drove away, leaving the ambush behind me. I woke up in my city apartment to a phone that was vibrating so violently it had skittered halfway across the nightstand. It was buzzing like an angry hive, notification after notification stacking up on the lock screen. My head felt heavy, a hangover from the adrenaline of the night before, but as I picked up the device, the fog cleared instantly. My scheduled post had gone live at 7:00 a.m. It was now 9:30, and the explosion I had engineered was detonating in real time. The screenshot of my bank transfers, that damning $52, $450 total, was being shared, retweeted, and commented on by people I hadn't spoken to since high school. The photo of Tyler's gleaming car next to my $2 socks had struck a nerve, transforming my personal grievance into a public indictment of everything our town claimed to stand for, but rarely practiced. The first concrete detail of the fallout came via a text from my cousin Sarah, the only relative who hadn't drunk the Kool-Aid. "Hannah." The message read, "I don't know what you did, but Mom just called me. She said Aunt Linda opened an envelope under the tree about an hour ago and screamed so loud the neighbors probably called the cops. Dad is raging. He says you ruined Christmas. Are you safe?" I stared at the screen, feeling a grim satisfaction. They had expected a silent bank transfer. Instead, they got a legal notice. The town of Oakhaven, usually so polite and repressed, was tearing itself apart in the comments section. Neighbors were tagging each other. Church members were messaging me privately. "We had no idea," one woman from the choir wrote. "Your mother told us you were doing well in the city, but she never mentioned you were paying for the venue." The facade of the prosperous, blessed Cole family was crumbling, but not everyone was on my side. The loyalists, the ones who bought into my parents' image, were vicious. "You don't air family business in public," one message read. "Ungrateful," said another. My parents were already spinning the narrative. I heard through the grapevine that they were telling anyone who would listen that I was mentally unstable, that I was having a breakdown, and that the money was just regular family support that I had twisted into something ugly. But facts are stubborn things, especially when they come with legal letterhead. My attorney George was moving with predatory speed. He had already contacted the bank and the county clerk, filing the necessary paperwork to freeze any equity moves on the house and initiating the partition sale process. Without my automatic transfers hitting their accounts on the first of the month, the financial house of cards collapsed almost instantly. The mortgage and the venue loan went into immediate default status, triggering aggressive collections that my parents could no longer charm their way out of. The most public humiliation came a week later. I was sitting at my desk at work when a video surfaced on a local community page. A neighbor, clearly fed up with Tyler's late-night engine revving, had filmed from their window. The video was grainy, fueled by streetlights, but the image was unmistakable, a tow truck backing into my parents' driveway. The repo man didn't care about Tyler's content creator status. He hooked the midnight blue Mustang, lifted it into the air, and drove off while Tyler stood in the driveway in his pajamas, arms flailing impotently. The caption on the video was brutal: "Guess the gravy train stopped." Tyler's online brand, built entirely on the illusion of success, imploded overnight. He became a local joke, the emperor with no clothes and no car. The pressure on me was suffocating. My phone was a constant stream of abuse and manipulation. I let the calls go to voicemail, but I listened to them later, sitting in the dark. Linda's messages were a masterclass in guilt. She sobbed, her voice cracking, accusing me of heartlessness. "We're going to be out on the street, Hannah. How can you do this to your own mother? We raised you. We loved you." Robert's messages were different, cold, seething threats. "You'll regret this," he snarled in one recording. "I'll sue you for defamation. You're trying to destroy this family because you're jealous of your brother." Extended relatives piled on, sending texts telling me to be the bigger person and fix this quietly. I felt like I was drowning in their noise until Noah found me crying in the break room. I finally told him everything, the full, ugly scope of it. He didn't offer platitudes. He just listened, his face hardening as I spoke. When I finished, he took my hands. Hannah, he said firmly, you didn't destroy your family. You stopped letting them destroy you. There is a difference. He offered to walk me home to be a buffer if they ever showed up. I didn't think they would come to the city. I thought they were too proud. I was wrong. A few days later, I walked into the lobby of my apartment building after work, Noah a few steps behind me. I froze. Standing there looking red-eyed, disheveled, and radiating fury were Linda and Robert. They looked out of place in the modern, glass-walled lobby relics of a life I had left behind. My stomach turned over, but I didn't run. For the first time in my life, my parents weren't here to ask for help. They were here to try to erase me from their mess. The lobby of my apartment building, usually a cavern of cool glass and echoey silence, suddenly felt suffocatingly small. My parents stood between me and the elevators, blocking my path to safety. Up close, without the flattering filters of social media or the distance of a phone line, they looked diminished. Linda's eyes were swollen, her makeup smeared in a way that was calculated to evoke pity. Robert stood rigid, his jaw set in that familiar bulldog expression he used when he was about to bully a vendor on the phone. But I wasn't a vendor and I wasn't a child anymore. Noah stepped up beside me, his presence a silent wall of support. But I held up a hand. This was my fight. Linda lunged first, not with anger, but with a weaponized sob. "Hannah, please," she wailed, reaching for my arm but stopping short when I flinched. "We're going to lose everything. The bank is giving us 2 weeks before they auction the venue. How could you do this to your family? We are your flesh and blood." Robert didn't plead. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "You'll call that lawyer today," he commanded, his voice low and dangerous. "You'll fix this. You owe us. We raised you, we put a roof over your head, and this is how you repay us, by airing our dirty laundry and stealing our property." They were rewriting history in real time, casting themselves as the victims of an ungrateful child. A year ago, I would have crumbled. I would have apologized and written a check just to stop the conflict. But the girl who did that was gone, burned away by the humiliation of Christmas morning. I straightened my spine, looking my father directly in the eye. "I don't owe you a thing," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I have the receipts. 3 years. $52,000. I co-signed a loan you told me was just paperwork, risking my credit for a house I wasn't allowed to call mine. I lived like a broke college student in a drafty apartment while you bought new lights for the venue and a sports car for Tyler." They tried to interrupt, but I talked over them, my voice rising just enough to cut through their noise. "You didn't just take my money," I said, letting the words land like stones. "You tried to erase me from my own story. You tried to erase me from the business and the house. My name only mattered when it was on a check. You wanted my signature, but you didn't want a daughter." "Intentions matter," my mother cried, clutching her purse. "We always meant to pay you back. You're threatening the whole family over a few mistakes and a delay." Robert scoffed, shaking his head. "You're heartless. You've let that city job rot your soul." "I'm done," I said, and I felt the truth of it in my bones. "I will not send another dollar. I will not undo the legal process. The sale goes through, and if you continue to call me, show up at my job, or come to my home, I will pursue a restraining order." Robert's face turned a violent shade of purple. "If you walk away today," he spat, "don't ever call us again. You're dead to us." I looked at them, really looked at them, and realized I felt absolutely nothing. No fear, no guilt, just a profound sense of release. "I stopped calling years ago, Dad," I replied softly. "You just never noticed." I turned and walked toward the elevators, my legs shaking violently, but I did not look back. The months that followed were a blur of legalities and silence. The partition sale went through. Cole's Landing closed quietly, stripped of its grandeur, and the family home was foreclosed upon shortly after. Through the grapevine, I heard that my parents had downsized to a cramped rental on the outskirts of town, a place with peeling paint and no lake view. Tyler moved back in with them, bitter and aimless, spending his days arguing with strangers on the internet and blaming haters for his failure to launch. They continued to tell anyone who would listen that I had destroyed them, but their audience was shrinking. Meanwhile, my life began to expand. I moved into a new apartment, one with sunlight and a view of the skyline. I bought a car, a reliable SUV that I paid for with my own money, and for the first time I didn't feel a knot of anxiety when I turned the key. Noah and I took a week off and drove west. Standing on the rim of the Grand Canyon looking out over the terrified vastness of the American landscape, I felt a sense of freedom so acute it made me dizzy. I was small against the canyon, but I was free. Back home, I started therapy, slowly untangling the wires of guilt and obligation that had been crossed in my brain since childhood. The community in Oakhaven eventually realigned. Some relatives reached out quietly, admitting they believed me, but didn't want to get in the middle. A few church members sent awkward messages of apology. I was polite, but I kept my distance. I was building a new community now, neighbors who knew me as Hannah, not as the Cole's daughter, and friends at work who valued me for my mind, not my wallet. One afternoon, I heard the news Cole's Landing had been bought by a new owner who planned a complete rebrand. It wasn't the Cole's legacy anymore. It was just a building. I decided to drive by one last time to close the book for good. I turned my car onto the familiar winding road that led to the lake, my heart beating a steady, calm rhythm against my ribs. The gravel crunched familiarly under my tires, but everything else about the place was unrecognizable. I slowed the car as I approached what used to be Cole's Landing. The massive rustic wooden sign that my father had commissioned, the one he polished more often than he hugged his children, was gone. In its place stood a sleek modern monument made of brushed steel and stone, bearing the name The Harbor at Oakhaven. The building itself had been stripped of the faux country kitsch my mother adored. The siding was a deep, calming navy, and the chaotic landscaping had been replaced with clean, minimalist lines. I pulled onto the shoulder and just sat there, the engine idling. For years, this plot of land had loomed in my imagination as a mythical fortress, a place that demanded blood and treasure to sustain. But seeing it now stripped of my parents' ego and my brother's delusions, it looked shockingly ordinary. It was just a building by a lake. It was just real estate. The monster wasn't real. It was just a shadow cast by people who were too small to stand in the sun. I waited for the old pang of anxiety, the phantom pressure on my chest, but it never came. Instead, I felt a clean, hollow silence where the fear used to be. It was the quietest, most peaceful feeling I had ever known. That drive-by was the final funeral for the girl I used to be. For so long, I had conflated abuse with duty. I believed that the American definition of a good daughter meant unlimited sacrifice, that resilience was measured by how much dead weight you could carry without buckling. I thought family was a debt that could never be fully paid. But looking at that stranger's building, I realized I had been wrong. Resilience wasn't about enduring toxic people. It was about having the strength to stand up and walk away from them. I realized that community isn't something you are born into like a sentence. It is something you choose. And most importantly, I understood that personal freedom, the kind that truly matters, is the absolute right to say no, even to the people who share your DNA. It has been 2 years since the ambush on Christmas morning. My life looks nothing like the narrow, fearful existence I led when I was funding their facade. My career has flourished in ways I hadn't dared to imagine. I took lead on a massive merger project last spring and secured a promotion that put me in a corner office. My bank accounts are healthy, boring, and entirely mine. There are no secret drains, no panic attacks at the ATM, no mental math while buying groceries. I bought a house last month, not a sprawling estate to impress the neighbors, but a cozy craftsman bungalow with a porch where I actually sit and drink coffee, rather than staging it for a photo. Noah is there on the porch with me. We got engaged 6 months ago, and we are planning a wedding that will be small, private, and paid for in cash. There will be no content, created no performances for social media. Just us and the people who actually know us. We talk often about the family we want to build. We talk about how love should never come with an invoice attached, how we will never treat our future children as retirement plans or vanity projects. We are building a life based on partnership, not transaction. I still hear whispers about the Coles from time to time. In a small town, silence is impossible. I hear that my parents still tell their version of the story to anyone who will listen at the grocery store, painting themselves as martyrs betrayed by a greedy daughter. I hear that Tyler is still bouncing between careers, blaming his lack of success on haters and trolls, bitter that the world refuses to hand him a living. But when I hear these updates, they feel distant, like news reports about strangers in a foreign country. Their anger can't reach me anymore. Their narrative has no power here. I used to wait for an apology. I used to fantasize about the day they would call weeping and admit they were wrong. I know now that day will never come. People like them don't reflect, they deflect. But I realized I didn't need their remorse to find my peace. Closure wasn't something they could give me. It was something I had to take for myself. Some families don't just break under pressure. The pressure reveals what was always broken beneath the surface. They didn't change, they were just finally exposed. It's golden hour now. I'm sitting on my back deck, the evening light filtering through the trees, casting long, warm shadows across the yard. Noah is inside humming as he cooks dinner. My phone is sitting on the table, face down, silent. I open my notebook to sketch out the itinerary for our honeymoon, a road trip up the coast, just open road and endless possibilities. I think back to that freezing driveway, the red bow on the Mustang, and the $2 socks. They ambushed me with guilt and obligation. I sacrificed my 20s to keep their world spinning. When I finally refused to be their ATM, they tried to erase me with lies and blame, tried to threaten me back into silence. But in the end, they only erased their power over me. I take a deep breath of the cool evening air. They lost the house, the car, the business, and the daughter they thought they owned. I lost my family. And somehow, that's exactly how I finally found myself. That brings us to the end of Hannah's journey, moving from being an invisible safety net to finally claiming her own life. It leaves us wondering just how much we should sacrifice for family before it becomes too much. What would you have done in her position? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single comment of your thoughts. If you enjoyed this narration, please consider subscribing. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Ashes of Yesterday. We'll see you next time.